Thank you. I'm going to talk for about 15 or 20 minutes and then spend the rest of the time on Q&A. And the Q&A is not restricted to what I might have covered in my talk. You can ask me about anything. I'll do my best to answer if I can. If I can't, I'll tell you I can't answer. I want to tell you just a little bit more about myself, particularly my politics, and a bit more about the Conservative Muslim Forum. I want to cover the demographics of British Muslims, look at their historical voting patterns, try to explain why those voting patterns exist. Then I want to share some data about BME MPs, which I worked out last year, because I think it shows a fundamental difference between us, the Conservative Party. I hope I'm talking to fellow Conservatives, although when I was at university I belonged to both the Cambridge University Conservative Association and the Cambridge University Labour Club. But I used to go more to the Conservative Association because they had better food. And then I want to wrap up by talking about what I see as the key philosophical difference between Conservative and Labour when it comes to thinking about minorities of all kinds. When you look around the UK and America, you see societies that are increasingly divided in very many ways. And against this background of division, I want to congratulate you for reaching out across the oldest, deepest and most bitter divide of all by inviting somebody to speak to you who comes from the other place. I'm not going to tell you about the story of my life. If you Google my name, you'll find my website, mohamedamin.com, which will tell you more about me than you could ever want to know. But what I do want to say is that I've lived in the UK since 1952. I came here when I was less than 2 years old. And I grew up holding political views on various parts of the left, including being a Trotskyist for a couple of years, until in my 30s I saw Margaret Thatcher transforming Britain. And then watching Milton Friedman on TV, a television series called Free to Choose, which you can still find on YouTube, 7-part series, half an hour each. If you haven't seen it, I strongly recommend it. And he convinced me about free market capitalism, and I've been a party member since 1983. The Conservative Muslim Forum was founded by Lord Sheikh, who was and still is the first Muslim conservative peer of the modern era, followed by several others. And every member of the Conservative Muslim Forum is a card-carrying, paid-up member of the Conservative Party, but not a Muslim. You don't have to be a Muslim to join the CMF any more than you have to be a Christian to join the Conservative Christian Fellowship. And if you want to know more about the Conservative Muslim Forum, just visit our website, conservativemuslimforum.com. So on to Muslim demographics. The 2011 census shows that Muslims are now just under 5% of the population. And historically, the community has been overwhelmingly Pakistani, Bangladeshi, and to a lesser extent, Indian. And that's still true, but in recent years, we've seen very significant growth in the UK of Muslims from the Middle East and Muslims from Africa. And roughly about 5%, maybe just under 5% of Muslims in Britain are actually converts who are ethnically white British. Or indeed Afro-Caribbean, because you get conversions into Islam from the Afro-Caribbean community as well. The demographic shape of the British Muslim community is very different from that of white Britons. I said earlier, Muslims are about 5%. The statistic for England and Wales from the census is 4.8% of all people in England and Wales are Muslims. But if you look at children aged 0 to 4, all children aged 0 to 4, 9.1% of them are Muslim. And even up to age 15, all children aged 15 or under, we're still talking 8.5% who are Muslim. So that 4.8% is going to grow just by natural demographics, although while you get a lot of fear-mongering amongst anti-Muslim bigots saying that Muslims are taking over Europe, a book which I strongly recommend, it's quite short, and I'm planning to write a review, but I haven't got round to writing the review. It's called The Myth of the Muslim Tide. And I can't remember the name of the author, but you'll find the book very easily on Amazon from its title. And one of the things this book points out is how, after a delay, immigrant communities, both the Jewish community into the UK 100 years ago and Muslim communities in Europe now, in France and Britain, the numbers of children that they have drop very quickly until they become very similar to the host community that they've immigrated into. And similarly, countries like Iran. Iran is now under-reproducing itself. That's not true of countries like Egypt, but you do get significant demographic change. And Muslims are concentrated in inner cities. On the CMF website, we've got I printed it off just to wave it around. In the resources section from the menu, we've got a list of all 80 parliamentary constituencies where the constituency is 10% or more Muslim. And the top of the list, they're really dense constituencies, overwhelmingly inner cities, starting at the right at the top with Birmingham Hodge Hill, which is 52.1% Muslim. Bradford West, 51.3%. Those are the only two where Muslims are more than half the population, but there are lots of others in the 40s. While they are concentrated in inner cities, though, Muslims are also moving out into the suburbs, and that has electoral implications because it means that certain seats that historically might have been regarded as safe Conservative seats, as you get different communities moving in, they become more challenging and more problematical for the party to continue to hold. The historical voting pattern is very simple. Historically, Muslims have overwhelmingly voted Labour. However, that is changing. The earliest general election for which I've got good data is 2010. And I recommend going to the website for Lord Ashcroft polls and downloading his free report from 2012, Degrees of Separation, Ethnic Minority Voters and the Conservative Party. And another way of finding it is just to do a Google site search on my own website, because I've got links to it. I swear by it. And in 2010, about 15% of British Muslims voted Conservative. The rest overwhelmingly voted Labour. By the 2015 general election, that had changed. That 15% had become 25%. Still a long way behind British Hindus and British Sikhs, who in the 2015 general election voted almost exactly 49% each Labour Conservative. So we've reached parity with British Hindus and British Sikhs. We're a long way behind with British Muslims, only 25%, and with Afro-Caribbeans we're doing even worse. So why these voting patterns? And it's something I spent quite a lot of time thinking about over the years and written about in the politics section of my website. The easy part of the answer is that, on average, Muslims are much poorer than white Britons. And poorer people, much as we would like it to change, on average, poorer people are more likely to vote Labour. But there is something more than that. If I told you that somebody earns £100,000 a year and he employs 5 people in a small business, and I asked you to guess how this person votes, your logical guess should be that he or she votes Conservative. It doesn't guarantee it. There are champagne socialists, but on average, the person I've just described, you'd expect to vote Conservative. If I give you one extra piece of information that this person is a Muslim, your reasonable, logical guess should change to saying that he votes Labour. And I've lost count of the number of doctors, dentists, lawyers, accountants that I've spoken to, straightforward middle-class people, mainstream Conservative voters they should be, who are Muslim, from ethnic minorities, and they tell me they've always voted Labour. So why? I believe that the key factor is that people have long memories. I've got a long memory, my wife's got a long memory, we're both 66, but as well as their own memories, they inherit memories from their parents by sort of cultural transmission. You can't get memories in your genes, but they do get things passed down to them. And to be blunt, a long time ago, The Labour Party was the party that introduced the Race Relations Acts, while the Conservative Party was, and I stress the was, the party of Enoch Powell and of many other racists, and people take a long time to forget. When I started writing about this on Conservative Home, which is a website for Conservative Party activists, people poo-pooed me in the below-the-line comments. They said, you're living in the past. Enoch Powell was decades ago. People have forgotten him. People have never heard of him. One of the things I liked was that Lord Ashcroft, in that book or report I mentioned, as well as polling data, he held a large number of focus groups. And in 5 of those focus groups, Enoch Powell was spontaneously mentioned as a reason for not voting Conservative, despite the fact that many of the people mentioning him hadn't even been born when Enoch Powell was active. Things have changed, but it takes a long time for people to notice the change. The voting figures that I mentioned earlier from 2010 to 2015 show that change is happening. Another way that I can tell that change is happening is just by going to the party conference. I've been to every single party conference from 2008. I'm normally there all the way through. 2008, I took one day out to go and visit a client, but every year since then, I've been there all 4 days of the party conference. And just walking around the party conference and looking at the number of brown and black faces, that percentage, I don't count them, but you just can't help noticing that percentage goes up every year. So we are making real progress with all ethnic minorities, I believe. Now I want to move on to looking at BME MPs and what this tells us about the Conservative Party. And I think it's a really good message. I've always known that some BME Conservative MPs represented very white areas just from knowing who the MP was and where the constituency was. So classic is Nadeem Zahawi. I know Nadeem Zahawi, I met him for the first time when he was a candidate at the Conservative Party Spring Forum in Brighton. And he represents a constituency which is actually quite close to my heart, Stratford-upon-Avon, not just because of Shakespeare country, but because one of my clients, the National Farmers Union Mutual Insurance Society, is based in Stratford-upon-Avon. And I know it's a very white area. But that was just sort of, this odd factoid here and there. But after I gave a talk in Luton last year to Luton Conservatives, I decided to get rigorous in terms of looking at the information. And Parliament publishes the document about parliamentarians with all kinds of interesting data, and in particular it lists all 41 MPs who self-describe themselves as coming from an ethnic minority. Because the parliamentary authorities don't want to classify people, is this person brown enough, we'll put him in the sort of BME box. They simply ask parliamentarians whether are you from an ethnic minority, and if so, which. And of those 41 MPs, I left out the SNP MP, Tasmina Ahmed Sheikh, because I found, when I went looking, that the Scottish census website is completely useless. Trying to get information out of that website is a waste of time and effort. But the England and Wales website, census website is really good. And it's very easy to get census data in all kinds of different geographical ways, but in particular by parliamentary constituency. It's just sitting there waiting for you to go and look at it. And so for all 40 BME MPs in England and Wales, and I think from memory they're all in England, I went and looked at their constituencies, and I did a very simple categorization. White and everybody else. The census is more detailed than that, but you can confuse yourself with excessive data. Just white and non-white was all I was interested in. And this is a printout from my website of an article called UK Political Party Differences in Selecting BME Parliamentary Candidates. And most of the article is actually something I wrote on Conservative Home. The Conservative Home editor goes for sexier titles than I do. BME MP is a tale of two parties. And there are 17 Conservative BME MPs. On average, their seats are 6.35% BME, so 6.35% non-white. There are 23 Labour BME MPs. On average, their seats are 26.73% BME. Now that's not a surprise. Labour holds far more inner city seats, and inner city seats are where you find BME people. What surprising is the next collection of facts. The average Conservative held seat, looking at all Conservative MPs, is 7.62% BME. You know, we hold lots of leafy sort of seats. But the average seat held by a Conservative BME MP is more than 1% whiter than the average Conservative held seat. Because, that's right, the BME Conservatives hold seats that are 6.3% non-white. The average Conservative seat is 7-something% non-white. So seats held by Conservative BME MPs are whiter than the average Conservative seat. Not the way around that you'd expect. The average Labour held seat, looking at all BME Labour seats, is 20.4% non-white. So the average BME MP for Labour is sitting in a seat that is 6% darker than the average Labour held seat. So what this tells me is, first of all, that Conservative associations are picking their candidates on merit. They are not looking to see, you know, we are a very white seat, therefore we're going to discriminate against Nadeem Zahawi or Sam Gyimah or Kwasi Kwarteng or Sajid Javid. There's a whole list of names I could give you. I can't remember all of the BME Conservative MPs, but a lot of them, and a lot of them represent very white seats. Not all of them. Alok Sharma represents a seat which is he's got the highest BME seat for any Conservative MP. And that's 19% Conservative. But that 19% is actually lower than the lowest Labour held seat, apart from two, where you've got anomalies, where you've got very white seats with Labour BME MPs. Meanwhile, as I said, of the 23 BME Labour MPs, apart from two, Norwich South and Wigan, Labour only seems to pick BME candidates for safe Labour seats if they are dark Labour seats. There are plenty of safe Labour seats that are very white up in the northeast, in old coal mining country and so on. Labour just does not, in practice, pick BME candidates for those seats. As I said, there are a couple of exceptions, Wigan and Norwich South. And this leads me on to the Conservative Party's philosophy about minorities. And it took me a long time to sort of fully understand it, and in some ways it's slightly hard to explain. But I think there's an absolutely fundamental difference between the way that the Conservative Party sees our society and the way that the Labour Party sees it. As far as I'm concerned, Conservatives see society as being made up of individuals. Each of us is an individual, each of us has rights, including the right not to suffer discrimination. The Labour Party sees society as being made up of groups. It talks about the disadvantages of groups and the rights of groups, but it sees society as made up of groups. And if the Labour Party looks at me, they don't see Muhammad Amin individual, they see Muhammad Amin somebody who is Pakistani of origin, somebody who is Muslim, somebody who lives in inner city, but they see me by my categorizations rather than as an individual. And another way to put it in a slightly provocative sense is that I really believe that Muslims, as Muslims, are not entitled to any rights at all. I don't believe there is any such thing as group rights. The rights that I'm entitled to are mine in my capacity as an individual British citizen. That includes, of course, the right to practice whatever religion I choose and not to be discriminated against. But they're rights that attach to me as an individual, not because I happen to be a member of a group. And that's why the Conservative Party was the first party to have a woman leader, the first party to produce a woman Prime Minister, the first party to produce a Prime Minister who's ethnically Jewish, Israeli, the first party to be led by a practicing Jew. And I hope that we turn out to be the first party to produce a Muslim Prime Minister. But if we do, it will be because we've chosen him or her on their individual merit. And that's all I want to say. Thank you, and let's take questions.